Right, I think we're gonna get started now. But before we do crack on, I have two very, very important questions to ask. Number one, can you see my screen? If you can, please, can you raise your hand in the GoToMeeting chat? Excellent. And me asking that and you answering actually answered the second question, which is can you hear me, which is brilliant. So thank you very much for that. So let's get started. So welcome again to the What's New in Tableau 2020.2 webinar. That's the session we're going to be running today. A bit of a brief introduction. So my name is Anoop. I'm going to be one of your hosts for today. I'm a principal consultant and trainer here at Biztory. A little bit of background about myself. I've worked with data for over 14 years now. I've worked in a variety of different organizations and industries, from healthcare to finance to logistics to manufacturing. I've got a wide and varied experience with data, with different types of data sets, different technologies, different actual database tools as well. But I've worked specifically with Tableau for about 7.5 years, so I've seen it come on a lot from where it was when I first started to what it is today. And actually, this is one of the most exciting releases for me. There's been a few, but today's one, the one that I'm talking about, there's some really, really cool features that we want to showcase for you. I'm a Tableau Desktop and Server certified professional, so I've put a lot of time and effort into learning my trade, and hopefully that's why I can help you see what value you can get from Tableau and what you can get from this latest version of Tableau. I'm also really, really football mad. I love football. So this time during lockdowns, that's been quite tough, not being able to watch as much as I would usually. I'm also a Liverpool fan, so I'm eagerly awaiting the start of the Premier League season again in a couple of weeks, and hopefully we can get those last 2 wins and finally end our 30 years of waiting for the Premiership title. But I essentially, I can't wait for that to start. But let's see what happens in the next couple of weeks. I'm also a really, really bad magician, so I've tried my hand at magic. I recently, actually, in one of the Biztory team events, I showcased my magic talents with some really, really bad magic using my 5-year-old son's magic set. I'm sure the rest of the team can confirm that it wasn't the best performance, but there you go. I love watching magic, and I had a go at it, but I'm not the best. I'm going to hand over to Chris, my colleague, who's also going to be helping me out today with this webinar, to introduce himself. Chris, are you there? Can can anyone put their hand up if they can hear Chris? Yeah, Chris, we can't hear you right now. So I'll introduce Chris. Do you want to? I think you're off mute, but your microphone may be turned down. I don't know if you want to try turning your microphone up, possibly. Very strange. Always the way with live demos. I'll give you a bit of a background into Chris and what he does, and hopefully we will be able to get him back for the later parts of this session. So yeah, Chris is an analytics consultant here at Biztory. He joined earlier this year. He's done some work. He's been working with Tableau for a few years, and he joined us after completing his master's last year. He really loves outdoorsy stuff, so surfing, traveling, hiking, that sort of things. But he says that he's an excellent magician, but when it comes to finance, being a financial magician, so he's really good at making money disappear. To be fair, that kind of magic I can do as well. I think during lockdown, it's been easy to just go and click on Amazon and order as much as we want. But yeah, there we go. So that's a quick background into Chris, and hopefully he'll be able to join us and give us we can all hear him, and he can share his demos a bit later on. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So there's a few things that we need to look at in terms of our agenda. So today, the things you can expect to learn are, firstly, what are the new features of Tableau 2020.2? So that is the latest version of Tableau that was released a few weeks ago. What are the new features of that? We're going to focus in on a few key main features of this latest release. We're going to demo those. We'll try and make them relevant, so what makes those useful for you. There'll be a chance to ask some questions. So in your go-to webinar hub as such, you can ask questions. So feel free to ask questions, and we'll come back to those at the end and answer as many of those as we possibly can. And then we'll give a roundup and say which upcoming webinars we have at Biztory, because we've got loads of exciting digital webinars coming up with covering all different kinds of topics. So we'll show you and speak to you about what those are. Okay, so let's have a look at the new features of Tableau 2020.2. So here's just a few of them. So we've got relationships, we've got set controls, we've got metrics, we've got Tableau Server admin views, a new Tableau Server management capabilities, some Tableau Prep advancements in terms of Salesforce connector and incremental data refresh. So we've got lots of different options and new features coming out, plus a load more can be found on the Tableau website, but we're really going to focus in on these three main ones. So relationships is a big one, so we're going to focus in on that and what that can do. We're going to look at set control and metrics as well and see how they can be of benefit to you at your work. Okay, so let's have a look at relationships. So relationships, this has actually been one of the most eagerly awaited releases of Tableau because of relationships. A smart person once said that a great relationship is about two things. First, appreciating the similarities, and secondly, respecting the differences. So this love guru who said this probably is referencing human relationships, but I think that this idea can also relate to data, and we'll have a look at how that can work. With relationships in Tableau, you can now create.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. There's Chris. Chris is actually in. We can hear you now, Chris. So when he's talking later, we'll be able to hear him. Excellent. Relationships in Tableau, you can now create logical relationships between tables. Tableau will only query the data relevant to your analysis or at the right level of detail. So let's have a look at what this means and how that can actually be useful for you. So firstly, let's think about what has changed. So your options for combining data have just increased. Previously, you could create joins and unions between multiple tables. That essentially what that is, in previous versions, your data model and your data source consisted of a single physical layer where you could specify your joins and unions between your tables. The result was a data source, which in essence is a single flattened table, which you would then use for analysis. In Tableau 2020.2, the data model in your data source includes a new layer, which is above that physical layer, called logical layer. Here, you can add multiple tables. You can relate them to each other on matched field pairs. Tables at the logical layer are not merged in the data source. They actually remain distinct and separate, which is really handy because they then maintain the level of detail until you need them at the specific level of detail in your analysis. So let's think of logical tables as containers for merged physical tables. You can then use joins and unions between your physical tables as you are used to by double clicking on your logical table to open it and work with joins or unions. I'll show you how we can do that. So this is what the new model looks like. So what this essentially is, you can see we've got our logical table, sorry, our physical tables here, which are joined and unioned together, and that creates a logical table, and then that is related to another logical table, and that builds up your data model within your data source. So this is then really, really powerful, and with all the different things you can do. But I'll show you a few examples of what this can mean. You'll also notice a few UI changes. So there's been a few UI changes take place with this release of Tableau. So firstly, on the data connection page, when you're probably used to dragging tables in from your connection pane on the left-hand side, and that would normally create a join or a union, depending on where you're dragging to. That is no longer the case. When you drag your tables in, by default, they will create a relationship in the logical layer. If you want to create joins and unions, simply double click on that logical layer and you're able to join and union your tables together as you were with previous versions. Second, your data pane, when you're building your views and your visualizations, is also different. It's no longer split by dimensions and measures in those specific groups. What you will now find is that dimensions and measures for each logical table will be grouped together. And then any fields or calculations that are referencing multiple logical tables will be grouped together at the bottom in a general area. And this also includes sets. So sets that reference a single logical table will reside within that logical table, but any that reference multiple will be at the general area at the bottom. Your view data is also changed. So when you would right click on a mark and view data in the table format, that used to have two tabs. You used to have summary data and full data. That has changed. So now you still get your summary data, but you then are able to see data from each logical table separately. And I'll give you an example of that a bit later. And then lastly, the extracts window. So when you're creating an extract, you used to be able to store your data in single or multiple tables. With Tableau 2020.2, you now can store your extract in logical tables or physical tables. So just the way that it's working is slightly different. Let's take a look at how relationships work and how we can make the most of this new data model. Okay. So in this demo, I'm going to be using the brand new demo dataset from Tableau. We've all grown used to using Superstore, but today I'm going to use the bookshop data, which is all about a fictitious bookstore. In this actual dataset, there are several tables. If I come in and show you, I'll connect to it. Here we go. We've got several tables, all which are at different levels of granularity, and I want to create some analysis and answer some questions of this data. So firstly, I know if I start building this, firstly, I know that I've got 4 tables, one for each quarter, that relate to my sales. Let's have a look at firstly how we can create a union. So actually the way you create a union is quite similar to how you would in previous versions. So you could drag your first table out, and then I can hold on Control and select my others and drag that out until I drop it onto union like so. So now that has created my new my sales table, my sales Q1 table, and that is a table that is unioned of all for my sales by quarters. I want to relate to this my addition table. So I've got my addition table here. I can drag that in, and I'm not joining anymore, so you don't get the Venn diagram. I got this noodle or this relationship. And as with previous versions, if we look at our first similarity to previous versions, Tableau will still create that that relationship based on fields in the physical layer that have the same data type and the same field name. As you can see here, we've got that relationship set up. We can add more fields. But if, let's say, for instance, we didn't have a link created automatically, we can click on our noodle and edit that in this way. But as I said, you no longer get that Venn diagram as you used to. If you do want to work with joins, you can do by simply double clicking on one of those logical tables, and then you can bring in the ones that you want. So actually, I can see my union didn't work, so I'm going to bring in my other 3 here and union those in like so. And here we go. We've now got our union of 4 tables. And if I want to come back to my logical layer for my physical layer, I just click close. Lastly, I need to have some data about my book, so I'll drag those in as well and noodle that onto my addition table like so. And Tableau will automatically create that relationship. So I've created my first data set. I'm now ready to answer my first few questions. So if I go to my worksheet, first questions are for me: which book had the highest number of sales? How many transactions took place for each book? And which book generated the highest sales credit? So sales credit essentially is that is the value that salespeople are attributed to in this bookshop which is actually the total sales value rather than discounted value. So that's just something to note. So question 1, which book had the highest number of sales? So to answer that first question, I drag my quantity purchased out and I drag my title as well. I then sort. So there we go. I've got my top one. I'll just show my mark labels as well. That's my top, my book that had the highest number of sales. As a follow-up question, I know that actually these books have multiple editions. So which edition of that book sold the most copies? So I can now bring in my ISBN edition. And I can now see I've got 4 different editions here. And we can see now I'm actually using fields from 3 different logical tables. So I've got my title coming from my book logical table. I've got my ISBN edition coming from my edition logical table, and I've got my quantity purchase coming from my sales logical table. And these will all be actually aggregated to the right level for my analysis, and the level of detail is set based on the dimensions within my view. My second question was how many transactions took place. So another thing you'll notice is no longer do we have our number of records field in our data pane. These have now been replaced by what we call count field. So we've got a count field for each logical table. So in this case, I want to know how many transactions took place. So I can drag my sales count out and we can see how many transactions took place for those books. So we've got number of books sold and number of transactions as well. But yeah, those are, as I said, those count fields replace the automatically generated number of records fields. Lastly, I want to create my sales credit. So I've actually already created this, but we can create this as a calculated field as we did before. Right click in the data pane and create calculated field, or for an edit, right click and select edit. And this is simply my quantity purchased multiplied by the price of my book. As you can see, because I'm referencing fields from multiple logical tables, so we've got quantity purchased from sales and price from edition, this does not reside in one of those logical tables. It resides in the general area at the bottom. I can then drag that out and see where the actual sales credit that generated for my salespeople. I want to order these by my actual edition. So I've got my publication date. So let me drag the year of publication out to sort those, and I can see which year or which edition actually sold the most, which had the highest number of quantity purchased, which one had the most sales generated in terms of sales credit. So that's so far so good. We've created a simple relationship between 2 logical tables. Let's take this a step further and let's see if we can look for any data quality issues in my data. So I'm going to, in my second data source, I'm going to create a slightly different data model. So in here, I want to look at my book data this time and relate this to my ratings data. So my ratings data essentially is multiple ratings taken for each book. And then I want to see how these are working with each other. So how many ratings I get for each book, what my average rating was, these sorts of things, and if there's any data quality issues. So first thing I want to do is get my average rating. And I'll change this to average. And I want to split this down by each title, like so. And I will sort this for my average rating from my highest to my lowest. We'll also bring our count of ratings out to see how many ratings we actually have received in total. And we'll also bring out our count of books. So this is actually quite important to see, because we've been able to see that count of ratings is up in the thousands. If you look at our counting ratings, it's hundreds and thousands, so they're quite high. Whereas my count of book column is only showing me 1 book per row. What this is doing, if we think back to what we would get with a conventional join, is when we create a join based on at this level on book. Essentially, our number of books, our count of book, would be actually multiplied by the number of ratings. So this would essentially mimic the number of ratings for each book. Whereas now, with the relationship, we retain our table level of detail, and the count of book for each title is correctly showing as 1. So that's really, really powerful. You can get a lot of use cases from here where you've got different levels of detail between your data, but Tableau will retain the level of detail for each table, and you're able to bring that in dynamically. We also notice that we've got some null values. So if you see here, we have a row which has got a title of null with over 500 ratings against it. Let's take a view at our data to take a deeper look at what's going on. So if I click on View Data in my tooltip, we'll notice here, as we said before, we've got a Summary tab, which shows us the summary values. But instead of having full data, we now have each logical table's data as a tab separately. So if I click on the Book tab, you see exactly what we'd expect, because there's no book title and no count of book. We have no rows. But if we come to ratings, you can see that the title is null for all of those books that have the book ID CH392. If we'd had an inner join, this data would have been excluded. So this can be really valuable information. So you can get to your data quality issues based on the dimensions you have in your view. So it's really, really powerful to see that. Let's look at this in the other way. So this is where we've got ratings data but no book data. What about the other way around? If I scroll to the bottom here, we've got book data but no ratings data. So the inverse of that as well. So you're able to see both at the same time with the relationship. You're not filtering out data unless you want to. So that makes it really, really powerful. But potentially that could be another data quality issue that needs to be investigated. The last example I want to show you is how we can create an actual schema and ask and answer some questions of that data. So I'm going to come into my third data source here. And I know that in this data set, my table that underpins most of this data is the book table. So I'm going to start with that. Let's drag book out. I know that I want to actually add some extra information about this book before I relate this to any of my other tables. So if I double click on this book logical table, I can then join my info table to it. So if I drag that in, then we're working with Tableau as we're used to. I can link based on book ID, and that is then joined to a calculation that is book ID 1 and book ID 2 concatenated together. So I create a join calculation to do that. So I say book ID 1 plus book ID 2, like so, and I hit OK, and my join is then complete. I've got the data that I want, and I've got the relationship set up in a way that I want to. If I then want to move out from my physical layer, which is where I am now, back to my logical layer, I close that down, and I can continue building out my schema. So there's some extra tables I want to bring into here. So firstly, I have author, and you can see when I drag it in, it noodles it together with author and creates the relationship, as I said. We have award. We have checkouts. We have ratings. And we have edition. And lastly, we have series. The other thing I want to do is add in some other information about my publisher. But publisher links to edition. So I will drag that and noodle that to edition like so. Depending on where you drag, you can see how that is relating together or noodling together. And then I want to bring my sales data in. So I want to add that union again. So I can bring in a new union as you did before, and drag in my 4 sales tables like so. Select OK. So I can now build up my data model in this way. So I'm now combining join data from my book and info tables, union data from my sales tables. Let me rename this as well to sales, and related data from all these other tables. And as I said, they will all retain their level of detail, which is really, really powerful. So let's go and ask some questions. So the first question I have, how many pages has each author written and in which genre? So let's start off with our pages. Pages is easy to search. Pages. And then I want genre and last name of author. So genre and last name of my authors to see how many pages each one is written. Let's sort those. So now we can see how many pages each person has written. You can see in sci-fi fantasy, Thompson has written a lot of pages versus McCrum, who's written a lot less. My next question is, I want to know the promotional budget for each series. So here we can see I've brought multiple tables together, but I want to look at the promotional budget for each of my series of books. So let's have a look at that. So I want to build my view up by looking at the sum of checkouts. So let's bring checkouts out first. And print run size, which is easy to search. Print run size in thousands. And split that down by publishing house, and series name and title. Series name and book title. There we go. So here we can see we've got, I'll sort that again, we've got different books within each series. For instance, we've got the Banana Slug series, which we've got different books in it. I've got here's the different number of checkouts we have of those and how many actually were printed. So the print run size in thousands. You can, if I then bring out my promotional budget to see how much money was spent on each of those books and series, let's bring out my promotion budget. You'll notice that I have the same value repeating for each one. Let's have a look at what this means. Sometimes using our totals can actually help us understand our data. So let me drag my totals out and I'll add my subtotals in like so. You'll notice that, for instance, for this this series, Banana Slug, there's 4 books which each have a promotional budget of 2, but the total is also 2. So that is actually matching the value for each actual book, which is a little bit confusing at first. But what effectively is happening is that is telling us that 2 is the correct value for that entire series, but that value is being repeated across each book. So it's not being evenly spread between those books. But that's what essentially I want to be able to do. I want to be able to split my promotional budget evenly between my books within each series. So I can do that with a calculated field. So if I've created this before, so I've got some of my promotional budget and divide that by the window count, so using a table calculation of the count of titles within each series. If I drag this out to my view now, and I want to have this running based on title, I think. Yeah. So now we can see for Banana Slug, take that one as an example. My total is still correct. It is, my promotional budget is 2, but it is now split evenly between each of my books. So you are able to calculate that at the correct level of detail, but the level of detail of my data is preserved. So the level of detail of my promotion data is preserved for the series, whereas I can then get an average or split that promotional budget down across each of my actual books. So that's a really quick breakdown as to the few different use cases for how we can use relationships. Let's have a quick recap on those. So, key takeaways. Firstly, if we look at joins, a join in previous versions of Tableau, what that will do, in the current version as well, but what a join does is it creates a new table as a result. That new table is static, and the analysis must be done after that join has created the new table. With relationships, you've got some flexibility. The relationship combines and analyzes your data simultaneously. So your data granularity or level of detail is preserved, so you get your data at the right level of detail. Relationships are really particularly useful when you can combine tables where you've got a one-to-many relationship, many-to-one relationships, or many-to-many relationships, because your table level of detail is preserved. You don't get values excluded based upon the join type. So before, if you have things like an inner join, you exclude some of your data. With this, with relationships, you don't get that. You've got the flexibility to choose what you can see and understand why things are happening. And the relation is dynamic, so only the tables required for building your Viz are queried. So you're no longer querying tables that you don't need to. It makes your queries much more performant and much quicker to run, looking at only those tables that are required for your Viz. So that's it from me for relationships. As I said, if you have any questions, type them into the chat or the question section in your GoToMeeting. I'm going to hand over to Chris. He's going to focus on a couple of the other key features which are which have been released with Tableau 2020.2. But yeah, we'll have some question time a bit later. Thanks a lot, Chris. I'm just going to make you presenter now.
Okay, thanks, Anoop. Can everybody hear me? Can you raise your hand, please, if you can hear me this time?
Yeah, I can hear you, Chris.
Lovely. Smashing. Yeah, some raised hands there as well. Brilliant. Okay. Right. So thank you for that, Anoop. That's very interesting. So I'm going to be covering a couple more of the interesting features that we have picked out from the Tableau 2020.2 release. So the features I'm going to be looking at in particular are metrics, as you can see here. And we're also going to be taking a look at set controls and maybe try and throw set actions in there as well for you today. Okay, so star of the show for Tableau 2020.2 is arguably the relationships and the new data model that Anoop has just been through with you. Hopefully you found that very useful. It's obviously an interesting new concept and opens a lot of new doors for your analysis in Tableau. It makes a lot of things a lot easier. So yeah, what star of the show is the relationships, but metrics and the set actions are a couple of new controls that are going to allow you to kind of get to grips with your data a little bit easier. So the idea of metrics, essentially, high level, it's just a new way of refining, of isolating and abstracting the information you want from a view and presenting that in a more digestible format. So the idea of metrics is kind of highlight the KPI that you want to follow with minimal data link usage. Now, those of you're all probably familiar with the work of Edward Tufte's a formidable data viz name in the community, but basically data link ratio is the idea of the amount of data that you're displaying on a visualization versus the amount of ink that you're using to draw said visualization. So that's what they're kind of trying to go for in metrics. So what they do is they help you track changes in your data with the minimum possible noise. So they give you a kind of analytics at a glance, effectively. So it's a few of the benefits we've outlined here for you. So metrics exist on your existing architecture, which means you don't actually have to build anything new. They're going to work with the architecture you've already got built, which is a very handy new way to visualize things. This is particularly interesting if I were to give you a use case. So let's say you've got a dashboard and your dashboard is quite high level. It's maybe an executive level dashboard, but you're maybe a regional sales manager focusing on a particular segment due to some sort of market volatility. Obviously, this is particularly interesting of current affairs at the moment. So this is the sort of use case for metrics. It allows you to kind of take the view that you want and abstract it from the rest of the dashboard. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So they're easy to use. You can create them with just a couple of clicks quite readily from nearly all visualizations. We'll go into some of the edge cases where you can't use them in just a minute. Like I say, they could be created by creators or explorers on the licensing level with the online Tableau instances. And they do also work with online Tableau Online and the Tableau Server installations, as long as you've obviously got your system software running at the correct version. So metrics provide you on-demand access as well. So they're abstracted from the dashboard, so you don't need to wait for the dashboard to load up, or you don't need to go into the dashboard at all. They're abstracted from that, and you're able to kind of access them in the folders where you place them. They can be moved about wherever you like to kind of create a view that you want to see. And then designed to be mobile first, so you can access these readily on the go. They work on live and extracted data, so the data all updates in the background, so super quick. And yeah, just more on the same. So curating the view that you want, they're basically, you can take them out from the dashboard, drop them into folders, rearrange the folders, and they're there where you want them and readily accessible on the go. Now, I've got a quote here that I think I've stolen from the Tableau Online or Tableau Learning website, but essentially you can create a metric on most charts that have a numeric axis or a date axis or header. So there's a couple of edge cases that don't fit this definition, and I'll quickly go through these. So when can't you use metrics? If you've got row level security set up, or perhaps permissions or user filters that are limiting the data that you're able to see, then you won't be able to create metrics on that data. Similarly, if a chart is created on a map that doesn't have a measure or dimension, there's nothing for the metric to quantify, so you won't be able to use a metric in that example either. And finally, if the chart has also got a mixture of date parts, both date parts and date values, then you won't be able to use metrics then. So in summary, metrics are basically a brilliant new way to kind of abstract and isolate and track changes to your data very quickly, very readily, in the kind of view, in the kind of configuration that you want. And yeah, they're ready to go and easy to set up. So I'm going to go through a quick demo with you here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the Tableau Superstore data. Now, this is a data set that you'll probably be well familiar with. And we're going to pop into here. We're just going to go to here. So again, if we go back to the example we gave before, so we're imagining that we're a regional sales manager and that we're trying to kind of look at a particular segment. This dashboard has got a lot of information. It's all useful, but it might not be pertinent for the changes that we're trying to track. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm a regional manager, so I'm going to filter down to the data that I want to see for the region that I'm concerned with. So we're going to jump onto the South region here. Now, I'm interested in this particular chart here. So we can see I'm going to look particularly at the consumer segment here, and we can see here this is our marks. So if you're obviously familiar with the Tableau terminology, the marks being this representation of the underlying data. So we've got here, this is the section that represents profitable orders, and this represents unprofitable orders. Now I'm interested in the profit here on this measurement here, and I'm interested in this profit for this segment. So to create my metrics, and you're ready for this, it's lightning fast. So all we do is click the segment that we're interested in, and bang, we've got our metric. So there's a little bit of configuration that might be used to set up here. So obviously we're measuring a couple of things here. We're measuring profit and sales. So I'm actually interested in the profit. So I'm going to change the profit, the measure to the profit there. now you'll be able to see that this is automatically showing me the latest value in a big number. So it jumps out to me directly. Where we were kind of mentioning how it enables you to track changes, obviously you've got a line chart here, which is a good way of kind of seeing the movement of that data. So we're just going to quickly give that a name. So unprofitable consumer segment south. Okay, so we've got a nice descriptive name, and we're just going to choose a location for this. So in this case, I'm going to put that in my sandbox. Now, when everything's configured, we're just going to click create, and we get our metric here. So there we go, it's all loaded up. Now you'll see I've created a few metrics already, and this is, I believe this is the new one. I can add that to my favorites. And now you can see this is all of the favorites I've created, but maybe, like I say, we can curate the view that we want to see here, and these are all independent of the dashboards that they've been taken from. So for instance, if I'm interested in this particular metric here, and this is another one of Tableau's new features, which we'll just throw in here, you can actually reorder your favorites now just by clicking and dragging. So that is metrics completed. Okay. And now let me just jump onto the next demo. So what else I'm going to look at is, sorry, let me just find my slides again. Okay. And so we're on to set controls now. So let me have a little look. So I'll open my desktop there. You see, there we go. So can everybody see my Tableau, my Tableau Desktop instance? If you could raise your hand if you could see that. Cool. So it looks like everyone can see my Tableau Desktop. Right, brilliant. So what we're going to do now is we're going to quickly look at some set controls, which is a new feature that's been implemented to allow us to have sort of filter-like consistency with sets. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly create a visualization here, which is going to be showing us customers by sales. Okay. So we've got this list here. This is all of our most profitable customers in order. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a set from here. Okay. So all we're going to do is go here. We're going to click create set. And we're actually going to do this by the top customers. So we're going to give this a fitting name. There we go. And that's going to be by the sum of sales, and that's the top 10. All right. So this is our new set here. It's just popped up here. Obviously, as Anoop was mentioning, there's a few changes to the UI. So this is independent of the, let's just pop up at the bottom here. Right. So now we've got our set. We can just pop this into color here, and that makes it a little bit more apparent where we've got our where our set is existing. Okay, so this is showing us the top 10 customers by sales, and the new functionality. Previously, we could always see the members in and out of the sets. What we want to do is, if we just undo that, we can click this button here, and it's just on the drop down here, as long as the set's on the marks, and we can click here and we can click show set, and you'll see over here that we're able to see a more sort of filter-like interface for our set. So if we want to go and find, let's say, Susan has not been paying her taxes, so we're going to remove her from our set. We don't want to consider her in our analysis. So we can find her in the filter thing here. And as you can see, the conditions are still true. So we're still looking for the top 10 customers by sales. And we've removed Susan, with this filter-like ability, we've removed Susan from our analysis, and that has shifted the top 10 down a little bit. Now that is brilliant. That is set controls. So obviously the benefits to this is it kind of allows you to configure and change your sets without changing the entire workbook. The set membership dynamically changes, similar to a filter. The domain refreshes automatically, so obviously it's affected by the other changes you might make on your data, filter actions, that sort of thing. And so yeah, it's the latest perspective of the data. But this is complemented by set actions, which is why I'd like to bring this in as well. So as you can see here, you've got the filter-like functionality, but that might not be necessarily ideal if we want to interact, say we want to interact directly with the marks. So I've already set up a my workbook here already. And what we're going to do is we want this to drive a list of customers. So we want to have that list and their independent totals, just for an example. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drag customer name here. We're going to have the sum of their sales, let's say, again descending, and we want to have our set. So we're just going to filter these to show us the value, the customers that are in here. Okay, so let's change that to that, and we'll change this to fit. Right. So we're going to move on to this dashboard here. So what we want to do is we want to be able to use this dashboard to drive this list using our new set actions. So quite simply, we're going to go over to dashboard, we're going to click on actions, and we're going to add a new set action here. So we're going to do this. This is going to be called add to set. There we go. And we're going to have this running on select. We're just going to have this one for driving the additions, and we're going to use this other list here to use the subtractions. Okay, so we're going to choose our set that we're going to target. And first thing to note, so we did have set actions in previous versions of Tableau. The problem with that being that they would use something similar to assign values to set. So that meant you would have to have the values you wanted to consider in your set changes. They would all have to be placed in the same select effectively. So it's not quite as incremental as the functionality that we've got now. So we're going to change this value to add values to set, and we're going to keep the set values when we clear the selection. We're going to drive that by customers by sale, and we're going to click OK. And we're just going to do the same here for the converse. So remove from set. We're going to have that driven on select, and it's going to be driven by selecting things on the customer list. And that's just going to remove those values from the set. There we go. So once we've got that set up, what we can do here is, as we've got there we go. And as you can see there, I can click these values and it's going to add them to the list, and it's going to change our total again. So again, we're going to get rid of Susan. We don't like Susan. And off she goes. And this is going to allow us to dynamically and incrementally change our sets just using the marks, which is a really cool new feature. One of the things that a nice little hack that I might quickly show you. So if you see here, as I select the marks on this sheet, it's graying out everything, which can be a little bit annoying. So one of the ways you can get around this is by creating a calculation, something similar to this. And it just needs to have a single value that's going to be given to every row in your data. We're going to drag this onto the marks. And when we add a filter here, we're going to just add a quick highlight action. And it's going to be a selected field on one. So that's customers by sales. And it's just going to be selected field one. And when you do that, hopefully, there we go. So that stops graying out the rest of the visual every time you click something. So that is all I have for you for the set controls and set actions. Yep. So skip through. So yeah, I'll hand back to Anoop, and we'll try and answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Right, I'm just going to take presenter back for a second. Right, so yes, questions. We've got a few questions that have come up, essentially. So let's start from the top. First question we have is, let's have a look. If we say, how does this work for existing dashboards with measured dimensions as we upgrade to 2020.2? So I think that's relating to relationships. So where you've got existing data sets set up and data sources set up, this won't actually change anything. What will effectively happen is your existing joins within Tableau Desktop will now revert to being encased within a logical table. And you just need to double click on it, and then you'll be able to get to your joins and your unions as you previously have. But then you've now got the flexibility to add to that or amend those data sources using relationships. So you've got a bit more flexibility there. Another question we have is a relationship kind of expanded blending on the data sources? So actually, this was something that we were talking about internally while we were reviewing what Tableau 2020.2 could do while it was in beta. And one of my opinions is that actually the feature of relationships is going to replace blending, most blending use cases, because you're able to still relate your multiple data sources together as you were before, essentially with blending, but you retain your source data's level of detail, which is often one of the hardest things to work with when working with blending, working with different levels of detail, but being able to bring dimensions in, essentially, especially, is quite difficult and tricky. So what this allows you to do is preserve that level of detail, bring in your dimensions, and still relate together. Saying that, I still think there is a place for blending. I just think that relationships will replace a lot of those use cases. And we have another question, which is the set control available for web editors? That's a good question, because I've literally, while Chris was finishing off his demo, I was having a look at that. Chris, do you know, have you had a chance to test if that's ready for web editors or not? Because I've had a quick look, and creating a set isn't available for web editors. So my assumption would be that adding a set control isn't available for web editors, but I don't know if that's the case or not.
It wasn't something that cropped up while I was looking through and preparing for this, but like you say, I think if you weren't able to create a set in the first place, I would imagine that would probably limit your ability to do that. So I guess for now, it's probably likely a no until we can get a clearer answer on that.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Chris, on that one. Next, do we get this as a recorded session to practice all you presented? If yes, where? On our registered email IDs? And how does relationships affect data blending from data sources with varying granularities of data? So firstly, yes, my understanding is there will be a recorded session to practice what we've presented. That will be available from our website, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that you should be able to get hold of that. That'll be you'll be able to access that in a few days, I think. But your follow-up question about relationships, which affect whether it affects data blending from data sources with varying granularity of data. So the actual relationships, I don't think it affects where you've already got data blending set up. What this will do is it will give you more flexibility to replace those blends with relationships. So you may need to have a bit of a rethink about how you're bringing your multiple data sources together. If you're bringing them together as a blend, or if you want to change that and actually have it as relationships, that may be something that you want to change. But yeah, that's essentially what you're able to do then. You can work with your data there that way. Another question was the relationship that showed, was that a star schema? So a star schema is a very specific type of a schema, and I'm not sure if that specifically is that is a specific star schema. I'd have to double check, but I don't think it is. But my understanding is you can create schemas with Tableau relationships, and there's very different levels. But yeah, I would say send us in an email specifically on that one, on whether that's a star schema and how you can create those, or what kind of schemas you can create, and we can look at that question in a little bit more detail if that's what you're specifically want to try and create. I think I'm just having a look through. I think that's all of the questions.